They chained him in the light of 100 alien suns, believing him conquered. His laughter carried through the chamber like a crack across glass, unsettling even those whose empires had stood for millennia. Records would later state, in the dispassionate prose of the Zarithi archivists, the human did not weep. That was true enough, but they failed to note the smirk or the sharpness in his eyes, or the quiet pulse of defiance that could ignite worlds. His name was Elias Rhane, though back home, no one had cared much for the name. In his hometown, he had been the boy whispered about over fences, the one left uninvited, the solitary figure at the edge of every gathering. He was too sharp-tongued, too odd, too unwilling to bend himself into something acceptable. Rumors had clung to him like shadows, that he'd been caught fighting, that he'd failed school, that he lived with his mother far too long. He knew the taste of ridicule. The sting of laughter turned cruel. Yet all of that, every slight and every silence, was written now in the lines of his face, carried with him into the heart of the galaxy. The chamber where he stood was vast, its ceiling latticed with banners of conquered civilizations. The air smelled faintly metallic, tinged with the hum of life support systems tuned for dozens of species. Around him sat the council, the scaled Ver, the crystalline Zarithi, the winged HFY. They had gathered here to announce the submission of Earth. They expected trembling obedience. "You are humanity's scout," the speaker hissed, her voice reverberating like steel struck with a hammer. "You will tell us your defenses. You will kneel, and your world will be spared suffering." Elias tilted his head as if weighing the offer, then grinned. "You guys ever read about Florida Man? No? Let's just say kneeling isn't really our specialty. We do chaos and microwave burritos." Confusion passed over the assembly. The word burritos was whispered between interpreters. The Zarithi archivist scratched furiously at her crystal ledger. "Burritos. Investigate potential weaponization." Elias shrugged. "Seriously, you captured the wrong guy. Scouts? They just watch and report. Me? I'm not here to watch." He leaned forward, voice dropping low enough to make even the translators falter. "I'm here to kill." The silence was total. The council's representatives exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether the human was bluffing or merely insane. For their kind, insanity was weakness. For his, it was camouflage. They dragged him to interrogations day after day, demanding strategies, codes, anything. His answers came wrapped in sarcasm. When shown alien weapons, he asked if they ran on AA batteries. When pressed about human leaders, he claimed to report directly to a warlord named Chuck Norris. The HYRR scribes trembled. Was Norris a god? Was he coming? One day, a guard held up the length of gray adhesive they had confiscated from him. "Explain this." "Duct tape," Elias replied. "It fixes everything, except my love life. And cats." The alien narrowed its eyes. "What is cats?" "Small apex predators we keep in our homes. They break our possessions, ignore our commands, and we adore them." Disbelief rippled through the council. To keep predators as companions? Barbaric. Terrifying. What they never realized was that behind the flippant words Elias was memorizing everything. Guard rotations, weapon placements, the rhythm of the patrols. Every sneer thrown at him back on Earth had taught him patience. Every rumor had taught him how to keep his true thoughts hidden. Now it all became useful. On the 7th night of captivity, when the air recyclers hummed low and the ship's lights dimmed to a cold twilight, something unexpected happened. A figure lingered by his cell, a Zyran interpreter named Salith. Her skin glowed faintly blue beneath the lamps, her long fingers trembling as she slid a ration pack through the slot. "You mock them," she whispered, her voice soft enough that only he could hear. "Why? Do you not fear?" Elias studied her. She was fragile-looking, her translucent features etched with something close to shame. Finally, he said, "Because fear is boring, and if I stop laughing, I'll remember how damn lonely I am." The word surprised her. She had never heard a prisoner speak of loneliness. Conquest usually silenced the soul long before chains were clamped on wrists. She stared, then lowered her head. Then I will speak with you, so you will not be alone. It was a small thing, but Elias felt the world shift. A gesture of kindness in the heart of an empire that had shown him only cruelty. He almost smiled. Not the mocking grin, but something quieter, something truer. The alarms came hours later. First a hum, then a shriek of klaxons. Red strobes cut across the hallways. Guards rushed past his cell, their voices frantic, their movements disordered. Power conduits flared and died. Something was happening to the flagship, something catastrophic. Elias sat very still. His heart hammered in his chest, but his expression was calm. He counted silently. 1, 2, 3, exactly as he had rehearsed in his head for nights. Salith returned, breathless, eyes wide. What is this? What have you done? He rose from the bench, tugging once at his cuffs. They snapped open with a tiny spark. Not me, he said, rolling his shoulders. Not yet, but it's about to be. Ow! Duct tape foil in the teeth. Been working it out since day one. Improvisation, sweetheart. It's what we do. Her mouth fell open in shock. He stepped past her into the corridor, moving with the certainty of someone who had never once believed himself powerless. Every beat of the alarms was music to him. Every flicker of failing light an opening. The empires had thought him a scout. They had paraded him as proof of Earth submission. In truth, they had locked their executioner inside their own throne room. And in that moment, as he disappeared into the crimson shadows, Elias Rhane ceased to be the boy whispered about by his neighbors. He was no longer the loner mocked for failing to fit. He had become something else entirely, something the galaxy had not prepared for. You who read this, remember, ridicule is tinder, rejection the spark. Given breath and time, they become fire. Mock a soul long enough, and you may one day awaken to find that the flame has learned not to consume itself, but everything around it. They said later that the flagship shuddered like a beast struck through the heart, its silver hull bleeding sparks into the void. But in that first moment of chaos, only one man moved with purpose, Elias Rhane, the human they had thought a captive, a scout, a harmless observer. He was none of those things. He was a storm given flesh, and storms do not beg permission to arrive. He moved down the corridor with a stolen rifle slung across his back, boots crunching over fragments of shattered crystal from the ship's decorative panels. Behind him trailed Salith, hesitant but unwilling to turn away. The alarms painted them both in pulses of scarlet light. For the first time in her life, Salith felt both terror and awe. She had known fear of her own kind, shame at her frailty, but this raw defiance carried on laughter and blood, was something she could not name. The central decks seethed with panic. Council guards rushed in formation, shouting orders in half a dozen languages. Drones zipped overhead, spraying beams of light to detect intruders. Elias wove through them like smoke, using memory instead of maps, instinct instead of orders. He seemed reckless, yet every move had weight. He stopped only once, to yank a metal pipe from the wall. Salith frowned. What is that for? Improvisation, he said with a wink, twirling it like a staff. Also, have you ever seen baseball? Her silence told him she had not. Doesn't matter, he muttered, and swung the pipe into the nearest control node. Sparks cascaded, alarms shifted pitch, and half the corridor plunged into darkness. The guard stumbled. Elias didn't wait. He launched forward, striking low and fast, each blow precise. Where the rifle was too slow, the pipe was quicker, more brutal. He left them stunned, gasping, alive, but unable to follow. Salith pressed her hands to her mouth. You are not like them. Damn right, Elias said. We're human. We do duct tape and bad decisions, and if we're lucky, we survive the fallout. They pressed deeper into the ship toward the weapons bay. There, Elias stopped to study the controls. Rows of alien glyphs shimmering across floating glass. His fingers hovered uncertainly. Salith stepped forward. I know their language. Tell me what you want. He glanced at her, suspicion flickering. You'd help me cripple your own council? She swallowed. They have never seen me as more than a stammering mouthpiece. You look at me. You speak as though I matter. Something in his chest ached at her words. He nodded once. All right, help me turn this thing into the galaxy's biggest firework. Together, they worked. She translated symbols. He rigged charges from salvaged parts and stolen grenades. His movements were quick, but not careless. Every piece set in place carried the weight of his years of ridicule. The uninvited parties, the whispers behind his back, the sense that he was invisible until someone wanted a target. Now he would make himself unforgettable. But the council was not idle. As they armed the final warhead, the chamber doors burst open. Delegates of a dozen empires spilled in, each flanked by soldiers. Their voices merged into a single decree. Cease, human, or perish. Elias rose, chest heaving, blood streaked across his face from a shallow cut. He smirked. That's the thing about perishing. You can only threaten me with it once. The room erupted. Plasma fire crackled. Shards of crystalline energy sliced the air. Elias Dove rolled, fired back with savage precision. He moved with the rhythm of desperation, every motion a gamble, every choice final. The rifle burned hot in his grip until the barrel glowed red. They cornered him against the reactor core. His chest burned with exhaustion, his wounds slowing him, his vision swimming. Salith screamed his name. The council advanced. In that moment, the highest stake, the thin line between victory and annihilation, Elias did what humans always did when faced with the impossible. He smiled. Chuck Norris would have done it faster, he said, and hurled his last grenade into the core's conduit. The explosion tore through the bay with deafening force. Shockwaves sent aliens sprawling. The reactor flared, light blooming, so bright it burned through Salith's translucent skin. She scrambled to Elias, who lay sprawled, bleeding from his side. His breath came shallow, but his eyes were still alight with that fierce, mocking flame. You'll die with the ship, the speaker shrieked. Maybe, Elias rasped, but you'll die remembering my face. And my people, they'll know one of us stood tall. With a trembling hand, he triggered the detonator on the remaining charges. The flagship screamed. Steel groaned. Alarms crescendoed. In those final seconds, Salith dragged him toward the escape pods. He tried to shove her away, muttering, "Save yourself," but she refused, hauling his half-conscious body with a strength born not of muscle, but of conviction. They stumbled into a pod, slammed the hatch, and launched just as a reactor went nova. Through the viewport, the ship disintegrated in a cascade of fire, tearing its escorts into chaos. Empires recoiled. Fleets faltered. The most powerful vessel in known space was gone, destroyed not by armies or fleets, but by one man the galaxy had dismissed as unworthy. Silence followed. The pod drifted among the stars, its systems dim but functional. Elias slumped against the wall, pale, his breaths ragged. Salith knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to bind his wounds. "Why?" she whispered. "Why fight with laughter, with madness, when you were certain to fall?" His lips curved faintly, even as blood streaked them. "Because if I let fear win, I'm just their prisoner. But if I laugh, I'm free, even dying." Her chest tightened. She had never known freedom. She had only known the heavy yoke of expectation. Yet beside this human, she felt something stirring, something that tasted of defiance and perhaps of hope. Outside the pod, the wreckage of the council's pride drifted in silence, a graveyard lit by the cold brilliance of distant suns. Inside, a broken man and a trembling translator sat together, bound by circumstance, by rebellion, by a strange companionship neither had sought but both desperately needed. And so the galaxy changed, not through decree, not through conquest, but through the stubborn audacity of one ridiculed human who chose laughter over surrender. Remember this, reader. The world may chain you, may call you lesser, may grind your name into dust. Yet chains rust, and names forgotten can blaze brighter than stars when carried by defiance. When you stand mocked and unwanted, do not bow. Laugh. For laughter in the face of despair is the truest rebellion, and it may yet set you free. They found him drifting among the wreckage of empires, a man broken in body but unbroken in spirit. The escape pod carried only two survivors, Elias Rhane, bleeding yet alive, and Salith, the translator who had chosen exile over silence. Around them stretched the graveyard of the Council's flagship, fragments of steel and crystal spinning like dying stars. To every empire that had once believed itself eternal, this field was a reminder. One human had brought them low. But for Elias, survival was less triumphant. His breaths came shallow, his skin clammy with fever. Pain racked him with every cough. He had gambled his life for defiance, and the price was steep. Salith tended him with trembling hands, whispering words in her tongue that even she did not fully understand. Fragments of comfort, prayers half forgotten. Hours blurred into days. The pod drifted without course, its reserves dwindling. Elias cracked jokes when he could, though his voice weakened. "Tell me, Salith," he rasped once, "didn't think your career would end babysitting a sarcastic ape, huh?" She shook her head but smiled faintly. "I think," she said, "you are not an ape. You are unexplainable." The universe, however, had not forgotten him. Human long-range patrols detected the detonation of the Council's flagship and followed the trail. They intercepted the pod, dragging it aboard a war-scarred frigate. Soldiers stared at Elias with a reverence he could not comprehend. To them, he was a living legend, the man who had crippled empires with wit, duct tape, and reckless audacity. Elias squinted at their salutes. "Don't do that," he muttered. "I'm not some general. I'm just a guy who hates losing." Yet the murmurs spread. The laughing killer, the human who turned chains into weapons, who mocked death and lived. They carried him to med bays, where machines hummed and fluids flowed into his veins. Salith remained beside him, silent against the hum of human technology. For the first time in her life, she was treated not as a tool of the Council, but as a guest, though wary eyes followed her everywhere. Elias noticed. "Ignore them," he whispered. "Humans gossip worse than your Council ever did. Give them a week. They'll move on to cats or reality TV." She frowned. "Reality TV?" He chuckled, though the sound was hoarse. "Entertainment where we watch people humiliate themselves. It's addictive. Don't ask me why." As he healed, word of his deeds spread across systems. Colonies whispered his name in bars and bunkhouses. On Earth, broadcasts replayed footage of his trial, his mockery, his final stand. The same neighbors who once mocked him now told stories of how they knew him when, rewriting their memories with convenient pride. But Elias remembered the truth. He had been their scapegoat, their rumor, their punchline. Only now, after he had bled for the galaxy, did they call him hero. And he hated it. One night, alone with Salith in the quiet of the recovery ward, he confessed, "Back home, they never wanted me. Now they cheer because I blew something up. Feels fake." Her voice was soft. "Perhaps they cheer not for the destruction, but for what you became. You showed them what was possible." He stared at her, the alien who had risked everything for him. "And you? Why'd you save me? You could have let me burn with that ship." Salith lowered her gaze. "Because when I looked at you, I saw myself. The overlooked, the unwanted. You laughed instead of hiding. I wanted to learn how." The words cut deeper than any wound. For the first time in years, Elias felt something unspoken shift inside him. Not triumph, not rage, but connection. It wasn't the wild, cinematic love of stories. It was quieter, fragile, born from gestures, from staying when escape would have been easier. Yet even as they found each other, the galaxy boiled. The Council was fractured, but not destroyed. Alien fleets regrouped, and whispers spread of vengeance. Humanity's leaders debated whether Elias should be hidden as a secret weapon or paraded as a symbol. He despised both options. "I didn't fight to be your banner boy," he snapped at the admiral who came to see him. "I fought because chains make me itch. That's it." "Nevertheless," the admiral replied, "you've become something larger. Symbols matter." Elias laughed bitterly. "Back home, I was the symbol of failure. Guess I can't win either way. When the council launched a counterstrike, it seemed destiny would demand more of him. Human fleets clashed with alien armadas in a storm of fire and steel. Though Elias was still recovering, he insisted on standing among the crew, his presence enough to steady shaken hearts. Soldiers who had never met him straightened at his limp, his scarred face, the crooked grin that mocked even despair. The climax came when alien warships cornered the human flotilla near a dying star. Engines sputtered, defenses faltered. It seemed certain the humans would be crushed. In the command center, panic rose like a tide. Elias, leaning heavily on Salith's arm, spoke into the silence. "You all think you're screwed," he said. "Maybe you are. But look at them. Those fleets out there? They've spent centuries conquering weaker prey. They've never fought someone who laughs while losing. So laugh. Make them think we've gone mad. Because nothing terrifies a bully more than someone who enjoys the fight." The room froze, then, hesitantly, one soldier chuckled. Another followed. Within moments, the command center filled with uneasy laughter, raw and jagged. When the alien interceptors intercepted their comms, they heard not fear but madness. And hesitation crept into their ranks. That heartbeat of doubt was all the human ships needed to rally, strike, and carve a path to survival. Afterward, battered but alive, Elias slumped into his chair. Salith touched his shoulder. "You turned despair into courage." He shook his head. "No, I just reminded them what being human means," laughing at the edge of the grave. The war did not end that day, but the tide shifted. Empires once unshakable now questioned themselves. Humanity, dismissed as a primitive species, stood taller than ever before. And Elias, the boy once mocked in his small town, walked among soldiers as a living echo of resilience. In the quiet that followed, he returned often to the viewport, staring at the marble of earth glimmering against the void. Salith joined him, and though no grand words passed between them, the silence they shared carried more meaning than any oath. One evening, as the stars drifted past like ancient witnesses, Elias spoke softly. "Not to her, but to you who hear his story. Maybe you've been the outcast. Maybe you've been the one they whispered about. I know what that weight feels like. But listen, your scars aren't chains. They're matches. Strike them, and they'll burn a path no one can ignore. They'll fear you, or they'll follow you, but they will never again pretend you don't exist. Remember that. Never let the laughter of others bury your own. Because sometimes, laughter is the sharpest blade you'll ever hold."